So, whoops, wobbly screen. Good morning, everybody. Karen Dodd from Wise Women Weekdays. Thank you for joining me today as we are joined again by, this is the fourth time, I think, isn't it? Good morning, Russell, Paul Arthur. Is it our fourth session?
Arthur, yes, and very good morning to you. It's a pleasure
Yeah.
to be a guest on your channel again. Thank you.
Well, it's lovely to have you, and there are comments. But before we go into that, as when you do these little shows or these chit chats, I call them, we always say, "Hi, how are you?" And then you start off, and then you go into conversations. And I said, "Hang on, let's record what we're talking about," because I was just saying how men have been, well, men and women, that the divide is so apparent these days for those that know what to look for. And I'm going to say this, and it's really weird because you need men, you need women, and it's a yin yang and the black white, and somebody's wearing black and somebody's wearing white today. So it's quite funny, just the way things happen. And I was just saying it's difficult for a man to find their role in today's society because we've pushed you out, and it's intentional. I say we, a lot of us don't know that we're doing women when I'm talking about we, but it's also the system, isn't it? Because with the feminine movement that came about, the burn the bra thing, we are equal, and we are equal, but we're different. I think, and women have been suppressed for so long, but now it's hard because a man doesn't really know their role. They don't know whether to open the door, to give up their seat because they might get slapped around the face, because women are equal and stuff like that. And so men, I think, have lost their way, and it has been manufactured deliberately, but we need men and we need to bring them back in the role. And as you were saying, it's ancestral. It's not just, the last 10 or 50 years. So what did you say?
Well, of course, I mean, the distinction that I made between women and men is that women are very much, and this is by design of nature, connected to the body and connected to the emotions, and men are very much in the head. Very head driven, very headstrong, as the masculine principle is, with drive and purpose. But even more so than ever today is men need to get reconnected back to the heart so that there is good intention behind what they're doing. But the problem is most men are so head driven, so competitive in such a challenging environment. And then we've got all the genetic conditioning that comes from all our fathers before us and their fathers before them, that go back all the way through to the times of the war and the conflicts and everything else, where men couldn't be vulnerable. Men had to take the charge, men had to be headstrong, and men couldn't show weakness. So I think we need to find our way back to that peaceful state, men in particular, where we're more centered with the heart, and the heart is driving our intention, and obviously the mind goes from there. That's kind of how I see things.
Absolutely spot on, because it is. I think the world we're moving into, the new paradigm, is about heart based behavior, really. And you're spot on with this competitiveness and this drive and this ambition to have the latest, whether it's an iPhone or whether it's the biggest car and the biggest house and the biggest yacht and the holidays. So men are encouraged or have been encouraged to be very competitive and ambitious to provide for their family, but you don't have to have a big car or a big house to provide. It is about the community, and that's what's been divided over the years. Even encouraging women to go to work, which sounds kind of great, but that's breaking up the family unit, and also supping the taxes, two people from one household paying tax. So there's ulterior motives behind this, and I think it's so important to come back to community and family. And it's very hard for men to find their role because women have been we've been suppressed for a long time. The matri, through employment, through the Bible, through being witches, all that kind of stuff. But we're coming out, and we've held our own. I think I had a gathering last night. We have a women's circle here in my house, and we
Right.
were talking about that. And it's really powerful. And I think women coming together and men, women's circles, men's circles. To be that true person, that true gender. I don't know what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say now, but I think, men have a massive role to play to come back to be that alpha male, if I can say that, but to be a true man, to stand in his strength and be empowered to be a man and be allowed to be a man and let a woman be a woman. So there's equality in that, but we just have different purposes. I think that's really
Yes.
important.
And I think also the man's role and purpose more than a woman is to be to provider, is to provide the necessities for life, whether that be a home, whether that be the security for the home to make sure that the family unit is safe and secure at the home. But also, once that's taken care of, that the home is taken care of, then the man's next duty and responsibility is to take care of the community, is to play a role in the community, to support the community. And of course, for that to happen, there has to be a desire and an intention, and that can only come from the heart, because only the heart is allowing and accepting and wanting to commune and help and be empathetic towards others.
Yeah.
Whereas a man that's completely stuck in the head, it's me against the world, chase, 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 got to get this, got to get that. It's kind of isolated from the community. And if anything, you see the tribalism of men, don't you? Coming together as a tribe, right? It's us men versus the world,
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
being, let's come together and form a community of men, women, and children and make
Yeah.
this the best community that we can.
Well, that's exactly it. Again, it's competition, isn't it? It's encouraged from school, to be competitive, to be the best you are, but better than the person next to you. And I look at
Yes.
that as bread and circus. In the old days, the gladiators, if the people were getting a bit uptight or whatever, they'd throw a gladiator fight and chuck out some bread to the people to keep them passive. And nowadays, I see it as sport. It's like football and a beer, and they're not all coming together unless you're in that team, you're in that tribe, but then you're fighting, the tribe along the road. I know that's kind of gone on from day one all around the world. You have these different tribes that fight each other, but it is about coming together. Definitely about coming together and serving your community, no matter what color or you are, or what religion you are, even, but serving it as a whole. Because again, I see all that as a divide, whether it's a color, whether it's a religion, whether it's an age, all that, whether it's a sex, there's all that has been deliberately to create division, divide and conquer. And we've seen that over the last few years, haven't we? With all sorts of reasons. But
Yes.
yeah, great. Well, it's lovely to have that chat, and I think it's really important because, as I was saying at the beginning, I'm going to be running a retreat with some friends to help empower men and to help empower women. And I'm trying to think, and no disrespect to most of the men in my life, but I cannot think of many men that are heart based, and have their feet firmly on the ground. There's a lot of spiritual men that I know, but they're a little bit floaty, because sometimes you can be, that hippie person hugging a tree and living in vans, and that's great. But then maybe you haven't got that business acumen, which again I think is really important, because money isn't evil. Money is a tool to get you what you want and to help the community. Money's great. I love money. I love money, and it's like it's the person who has the money and what you do with it. It's like a dog. You can train a dog to be a good dog or a bad dog. It's what you do with the money to serve ultimately yourself and your family, but sorry, then ultimately the community, to give back. And that comes from a heart base. And it's not just thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to give back. You've got to feel it. You've got to embody this. The same as being sovereign. To me,
Yes.
sovereignty and spirituality, they're connected. But the sovereignty seems to be within the matrix, within the human element of what we are. Then holistically, you've got that spiritual side that connects it both. So let's
So it's
talk.
that synergy, isn't it,
It
Karen? It's that
is,
synergy,
absolutely.
the mind and the heart together, working together in unity. Yes.
Excuse me. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what it is, and I've really sensed it, especially with this meeting or this gathering we had last night. We were all really feeling it, and then talking to the girls that came down. That I'm going to be running these retreats in. I think one's in May and one's in July for the men and the women. But we you can you can smell it. You can sense that the change is coming. So many people are ripe for the picking to do this work, and we just need mentors to just to put you back on the track, because there's so much help out there. And again, am I gonna upset people? It depends who watches this. I think if you are a mentor, and I use the word mentor, not a teacher, not a guru, because I think those days are gone, because we are our inner guru. We have to follow our own instincts, our intuition and discernment, but we have to get the knowledge, we have to do the research and go through certain experiences. And what I found quite upsetting, especially in this last few years where things have taken off, is that you have got these teachers, they're on the stage promoting a certain product or a certain way of life or whatever, but they're not embodying it. They might be talking about health, um, because that's really important at the moment, especially with what's gone on, which is going on, and what we put in the body, what we put on the body. And they'll say a lot of really good things, but then they might go out and have a cigarette, stuff like that. And I just think that's kind of hypocritical. By all means, do that, but don't stand on a stage and advocate I'm a health person, But then it's up to that individual watching that person saying, well, that's when the discernment comes in, isn't it? You think, well, okay, talk
Yeah.
about all that other stuff, and if you want to go and have a fag, that's fine. But I see that in so many other things, like even yogis. As I said before, I'm a yoga teacher, sort of semi-retired now. But if if you go to a yoga class and go and have a drink afterwards, go have a glass of wine, that's fine. But if you're embodying the true being of a yoga teacher, then you're encouraged not to take, things like alcohol and drugs into your body. And but so many yoga teachers will do a really good class, and then they're going, knock a few back in the pub later. And I'm thinking, okay, but it's not integrity. I think that's the word. The
Yes.
integrity is gone. And to me, a lot of the I words, integrity, intuition, intention, is really important.
Yeah, certainly. You've got to be, if you're unified within and you are at peace and you are fully integrated, then you are walking the talk.
Yes,
You are walking
walk
the
the
talk.
talk.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but there are many people out there that are preaching this, preaching that, but they're not practicing what they preach, and what they're doing in private is something completely different.
yeah,
And of course, those are the false preachers, aren't they? So
they are charlatans.
be
Yeah.
forewarned. Your
Yes.
saints, your saints are sinners.
Yeah. There you go. And so it's not just a thing now. I guess as we're all doing this work, we see it, because you're working with certain people, and it's more in your vicinity. It's more in your remit. It's happened all.
Yes.
Yeah. Look at the politicians. I mean, they're saying one thing. Was it two-tier? All sorts of stuff, isn't it? So it's always been there. But I think we're going through this massive, massive change in consciousness. It's incredible, and this year is incredible to do that. But we have to do that, and coming back to community for consciousness, connection, and do the work together. Some people are going to be left behind, but they won't know it because they just carry on doing the thing that they've always done. But for those people that do want to ascend as such and become a little bit more conscious and aware, then the time is now. And yeah, do the work. It's the inner work. It's going back to this thing, the heart based. Yeah,
100%.
heart base. So other than that, how else are you? You all right? Where are you? You in Bangkok?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm still in Bangkok here, and I'm going to stay here for the next month, and then possibly go to Malaysia. I'm looking at Shanghai as a possibility. So
Mm,
there's options available to me, and I'm someone that can kind of keep multiple options open, and then when the time is right, when the feeling is right, I'll choose one, and then
great.
I'll go. So at the moment, I'm enjoying where I am. So there's no reason to leave.
No, absolutely, absolutely. One day at a time. We do enjoy. And what are we going to talk about today?
Yes, today I've got a wonderful presentation for you and your audience. And today we're going to talk about a specific subject of achieving sovereignty, and that is a status correction.
Yeah.
So, are we okay to get the slides up and running?
Yep. Hopefully, I've set it up accordingly. Yep.
Okay, let's do that.
And whilst you're doing that, I know for people watching this, put some comments in the box because we do read them, and you get replies. So yeah, do that if there's certain questions. So I think one of the questions was, are you based permanently over in Asia? You're not, are you? You're transient. You're just as you just said, you're on the move. You're going where the call is.
Yes, yeah, freedom is my number one value. I absolutely put value right up there as freedom as my number one value, and then it's health, and then it's peace. So for me, freedom is very important. The freedom to be able to think, move, say, do, have, go, as much freedom as I can possibly have in my life is very important to me. If I get stuck in one particular place, or if I get stuck into a routine of repetition, doing the same old mundane stuff over and over again, it kills my soul. It
Yeah,
really is the death of my soul.
yeah,
And my soul is screaming out for uh, variety, for change, for experience, for expression. And I find that through moving about through different places. And don't get me wrong, I do sort of settle when I find a place, a location that I like, a culture that I like. I'll stay there for a month or two, possibly 3 or 4, and really enjoy it and soak it up. But then there's always that part of me that goes, right, it's time to move on.
yeah.
So, Karen, let's jump into
Yes,
this presentation, shall we?
yes. Let's do that, Mr. Free Spirit.
Good. So this presentation is called the status correction, and we are going to be talking about how you can rescind citizenship and restore sovereignty. And I'm going to do this in 2 parts. Today, we're going to do part one, and this is part one of the status correction presentation, where I'm going to speak about my personal journey into sovereignty. So I'm going to be talking about how I got to a place of sovereignty, what that looked like, and all the various stages that I went through to get here. And of course, here is a disclaimer and advisory. If anyone wants to stop the video, then obviously they can take a moment to read through that, which is very important. And then we move straight on to the subject of status. So before I get onto my personal journey that took me to sovereignty, I just want to highlight what it means to have status. So in law, status is the position, standing, and income of the state, all our wealth, in relation to others in the context of a society, of how we relate to other members of a nation state or a community. And when we break that down, we have position, which is our role and duty in a matter. We have standing, which is our authority and rights in a particular matter. And then we have capacity, which is our ability and competency in a specific matter in our life. So, for example, with position, you could hold the position on role of being a doctor for surgery. And as a doctor in that surgery, you have certain authority and certain rights on how you can perform your duty and role as a doctor in that surgery. And of course, you have a certain ability, you have a certain competency in the role that you play. And our status will change as the circumstances of our life and state change. So status typically changes when we go through different stages of life, right? So obviously the status of a 7-year-old child is going to be very different to the status of a teenage child. And of course, the status of a young adult is going to be different to the status of a teenager. And of course, the more things that we acquire in our life, so as we get a bank account and money, as we get a house, as we get a car and possessions, and all these bits and pieces that form our estate, then of course our role and our position, the authority and rights that we have, they change. And of course, the quality of our life is in direct correlation to our status. All right. So right now, everybody has a status in law. And that status that most people have right now is as a citizen of the nation state of the United Kingdom. And that particular status as a citizen also has what I call sub-status. So if you're a citizen and then you go to a public agency to register for a real estate property, you then take on the status of being a homeowner. And if you go to the DVLA and register for a car, then you take on the status of being a driver, which is also a title that is granted by the state, and where you are now indentured to all the legal obligations that come with that title and status that has been granted to you by the nation state. Does that make sense? Do you want to?
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. I think just to clarify, this is the norm, isn't it? This is we're talking
Yes.
about being in the public domain. This is what we all are. We're not in the private here at all yet. This is just standard stuff.
Yeah, this is the general consensus of how we operate in the context of the public domain within the nation state. And here is where I'm going to get into the personal aspects of my journey going into sovereignty. And in particular, I want to talk about psycho-spiritual conditions that affected my status through the various different stages of my life. So for anyone that doesn't know, psycho-spirituality is the integration of psychological self-awareness and spiritual practices to understand and reconcile thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And it involves the exploration of existence, purpose, and connection to something greater than self. And it leads to profound realizations, clarity, and good judgment, and tends to result in personal growth and integrity. Does that resonate with how you see psycho-spirituality? Is that
Yeah,
something you're
totally. I smiled when I saw it because I haven't checked these slides beforehand. I didn't have time, as I said. So when I saw psycho-spiritual conditions, I got quite excited. Yeah.
and in my personal journey, Karen, in my life, I've gone through 5 particular stages of psycho-spirituality, and they're listed here on the right side of the slide. So there's been a stage where I've been completely involved as the ego, and I'm going to go through these separately in the next slide. Also, an archetype that I call the seeker. There's one called the observer, one called the redeemer, and finally arriving at the place where I consider myself to be a sovereign archetype. But what's really important, and we're going to get into these different psycho-spiritual conditions or statuses, if you like, is that all of these I've gone through at different stages of my life. They've been very profound in my life, very big parts of my experience. But as I've gone through life, each one of these psycho-spiritual conditions has taken a new role, a new place within me, and they're kind of all integrated, and they do rotate. So I'm not one to say, oh right, I'm now this spiritual sovereign person, and I've completely overcome the ego, and I'm past it. No, 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 no. The ego is still very much a part of me and within me. However, because I've now gone through the integration of psychological self-awareness and spiritual practices, I now can see the ego within me. I can now recognize the ego within me. I know its tricks, I know its patterns. And so if it arises within me, it starts to have this effect on me, which I know is going to end up in a negative consequence and detach me and isolate me from reality. I'm quick to remove my power and my intention from the ego. The same applies to the seeker and the observer and redeemer. So before I move on to the next slide, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, again, I think that's a great description, because a lot of people, I mean, the ego sort of gets bandied around as being a bad thing, but we all have an ego and we all need an ego, so we wouldn't actually get out of bed. But like you say, going through these aspects of being human, you can observe and look, and it's a challenge. I mean, this is what life gift, it's a gift as well. And it is a challenge because you go through certain experiences which you don't like. But, anything that comes to you in your life, to me, is a lesson, whether it's something good or something that isn't good. And like you say, when you can observe, you can then act accordingly. And having gone through all these things, I mean, I recognize this going through my yoga training, looking at the Vedic texts, the ancient scriptures, and the Bhagavad Gita and stuff like that. A lot of it is it's all there. It's all there for everybody to read, but to experience, to actually go through life and get to the other end. And I love it because you've linked it to being the sovereign, that which is what all this is about.
Taking us on the journey. So let's move on to the slide, shall we? So let's kick off with the ego, which I've defined as a psycho-spiritual status. And of course, we got the picture of the happy, smiley face and the sad face, because the ego does have multiple personalities, right? Spring up. So the way that I've defined the ego and my personal experience is that it is a psychological mask that we wear. And it's a psychological mask that is formed from childhood right up into adulthood. And it's formed so that we can perform in the world. And the reason we need to form this psychological mask is because we are performing to the actions or reactions of other people. We are performing to the desires, wants, and needs of other people. We are, for example, when you're a child, right, your parents are going, right, well, you can do this and you can't do that. We like this behavior and we don't like that behavior. And then what happens is you start to perform to align with what your parents do or don't like, whatever type of reaction you're trying to get from them. And that becomes part of your psychology. That becomes the mask that you are putting on to appease or please or irritate your parents, whatever it is you're trying to do to get some type of reaction from them. And what typically happens is throughout, and again, this has been my experience, is you start to develop multiple personalities, because who you are to your friends is not who you are to your mother, is not who you are to your father, is not who you are to the local banker in your local bank down the high street, is not who you are to a stranger that you meet on the street. You're alternating these different masks as you meet different people in society. And what's typically happening, and what I realized in my own personal experience, is that this psychological mask, once I became aware of it and all of its different mechanisms, was actually masking over my true nature. Because when I started to form this psychological mask, this ego, and started to perform for other people, I became detached away from my true nature, my true intentions, my true desires. They were kind of put to the side as I try to fit in with the world and find my place within the world. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I just muted myself. It makes total sense, and I'm smiling again because we want to be liked, don't we? That's the thing. We want to be part of the group. So we change, as you said, we put on a mask, we change our behavior to fit in. And we do this through life. So by doing inner work, you realize what you're doing, and then you eventually will, as I know you'll talk us through, we get into
I will.
sovereignty. And I'll give you an example because I remember many years ago I was having an in-depth conversation, a really deep personal conversation with a friend of mine, and we had big issues to sort out. And we deliberately said, "Let's go for a walk." So we went for a walk, and then I saw a neighbour, and she was going, "Hi, cooey, cooey." I said, "Hi. Oh, you're going for a walk? Can I join you?" And my mask came. I said, "Yes, of course." Whereas I didn't want her, I was having this deep conversation and I should have just turned around and said no, but I didn't have the awareness, the confidence or whatever to say no. And I wanted to be liked and I didn't want to be rude. So that's a really, when you're talking about this, that's a mask that I was very much aware of wearing. And a lot of us do. We do this because it's hard to say no, but there's a ways of saying no, isn't it? We just want to fit in and be liked. So yes, that
Yes.
mask. Mm.
And my experience was that the true nature of myself that was never developed and never fully expressed, got lost behind the mask. And so I became and identified with this psychological mask that was formed to perform for other people in the world. And then what happened is all of the childhood trauma and shame that I experienced in my family. I know many people experience this, whether it's emotional or psychological, or physical abuse in their family, being treated very badly by their parents when they're young, all sorts of, and getting right into the pride stuff. But I had this unresolved childhood trauma and shame that I never ever spoke about. I kept to myself. I was never able to express in front of my parents, and that got bottled up, and that got suppressed, repressed, and pushed right down. And of course, underneath all of this was my true self, my true unexpressed self that was feeling unworthy and unloved because I didn't think I was getting the attention and I loved, which I know I didn't from my parents growing up, who were two very headstrong egos that had no time to be emotionally present and loving and caring with me. So all of that became very bottled up, very suppressed and put down on the inside. And of course, that then creates all the inner conflict, all the turmoil, which then metabolizes into an anger that's within. Yeah, why this happened to me? Why have I been treated this way? And of course, you've never actually reconciled it, so you don't truly understand it, but you sense it and you know it's there. It's become this anger. And so what happened to me, Karen, is I became this very headstrong man who was willfully ignorant of the world around me. I was completely attached to my identity, and I was very driven and determined. My way was the best way. And of course, when you're operating in the world with the egoic pride of my way is the best way, then you can never do any wrong and you never make any mistakes. And of course, everybody else is wrong and there's nothing for you to learn, right? Because your way, you're always right. And of course, that leads to nothing but failures and mistakes in life, because you're experiencing these failures and mistakes in life, and because it's not your fault, it's someone else's fault and some other reason why it happened, because you could have never have possibly got this wrong because you're so great and you've got this pride. It gets swept under the carpet, and then of course that becomes unresolved experiences that gets repressed and bottled up within to make even more inner conflicts within. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. You're talking really about the inner child here, and
Yeah.
we need to do work. Everybody has to do inner child work, and inner child work is fun actually, and it is talking to your inner child and
Yes.
playing and drawing and doing craft work and climbing trees, whatever it is, and it has to be addressed because as a child you don't know any difference. You're brought up by your parents, your carers, or wherever you're brought up. And that life that you're living as a child is the only thing that you know, because you're not going to compare when you go to school or wherever you go and say, oh, this is how my mum feeds me or puts me to bed or reads to me. Or the other one might say, well, I don't get any of that. You don't always have that conversation because you don't have the wisdom, I suppose, or the life experience to explore it at that age. And like you say, it gets suppressed. And then as you get older and you go through the school indoctrination, where you have to sit and stand and do whatever they say and learn this stuff that is totally irrelevant most of the time. A lot of kids, I remember myself, I couldn't wait to leave school. I enjoyed school and I was
Yeah.
okay at school, but I did my O levels in those days. So that just took me to 16. And I remember my brother picking me up on his motorbike, and I just turned around and to the, I think, the dinner lady, and that was it, done with education. But I also know a lot of my own children as well. They haven't gone to like college or university, not well, a bit of college, but university, even though they're supposed to now. But the reason I'm saying this is because quite often children, when they go through school and they have these fallout with teachers, when they leave, they sort of turn it around. Their ego will drive them and say, well, I'll show you. You thought I was going to be useless. I'll show you. And quite often they do very well. But again, they're not always living within their true essence of who they are. They're just trying to prove a point because they were damaged by another human being, an adult, along the way. So they turn into these people that they're not happy ultimately, but they're proving a point, if that makes sense.
It does, and taking off from that point you just mentioned about school, that also contributes to the separation of the false personality, the ego, from the true self. Because when you go into the school, the indoctrination centre, the education camps, it's one size fits all, isn't it? We're all going to
Yeah,
bunch you together in this classroom. We're going to teach you all the same thing, and we'll just see what happens to you. And rather than it's teaching down to children, yeah, with tuition rather than allowing them to express the intuition of who they
perfect.
really are, which you can't do in a society classroom. So that false personality that you're developing as an ego takes you further away from the true nature, which the schools are only just reinforcing. So from my experience of this, what happened is I just went into these catastrophic failures in life because I was operating with this false personality, this huge ego, completely detached from my true self that was unrealized, unactualized, undeveloped. And that led to me going to many different purposes and many different careers and many different relationships, trying to find myself because I didn't know who I really was. And of course, they were all unsustainable because I was trying to build a purpose and trying to build relationships with a false personality that was totally disconnected from my true self. And of course, that led to a life of conflict, a life of chaos. And I went through multiple careers. I went through bankruptcy 3 times. I've been through so many different relationships and burned so many bridges and had a stint of being homeless on the streets. That's where my ego and my false personality took me. And it was a life of immense suffering, an immense suffering that led me to question my own existence. But also, I got to a point, Karen, where I thought, well, look, because I blamed myself. I got to a point where I blamed myself. I realised that I had caused everything, which was a massive pivotal moment. But then when you realise you're the cause of everything, you don't want to go on because you think to yourself, well, what's the point of going on if I'm just going to cause nothing but more chaos, more pain, and more suffering? And that's when you really start to look at your existence and think, well, what's the point of being here? And
Yeah,
that's the place I got
yeah.
to. It's a very sad place.
Wow, I'm very sad to hear that, but it sometimes you've got to go all the way down to get up. And when these things happen, I mean, they are life lessons, aren't they? Because people say, well, I failed. And I said, no, you haven't failed. You just had an experience. It's not the experience that you wanted. It's not a happy experience, but it's a life lesson. And hopefully you'll learn from that, whatever that is, in whatever capacity. Because if you don't learn from that experience, failure in quotation marks, then it will happen again until you get that,
Yes.
until you go rock bottom. And then you have a choice. You either, leave the planet or you think, somehow or other there's this inner strength that will allow you to rise up and become that true person that you've been hiding all the time through circumstance. So yeah, it all
Because
makes sense.
good because it's getting to that point where you get to a point where you actually almost say to yourself, I can't go on as I am. And what you're really saying is, I can't go on as this ego, as this personality, as this fake
Yeah,
mask that I've created. I've got there must be something else. And that then takes you on to
Yeah.
the next journey, which is I put down as a psycho-spiritual status, which was being the seeker. So when I went through the massive valleys in my life, and there was about 3 or 4 really, really bad ones that really took me to a dark place. And I got to a point where I was ready to like leave this life. I didn't want to continue as I was. And then I had this massive spiritual moment and this realization, and there was a split between my ego and my awareness. And for the first time, I became the awareness and I could see my mind from a point of observation. All right. But that then led me, Karen, on to a journey of research and studying because I wanted to understand why. That was the big question mark. Why had my life gone so wrong? Why had I experienced so much pain? Why did this happen to me? Why? And of course, from why we go into, or I personally did, went into a phase of researching and studying. So I think it was in my late 20s or early 30s that I picked up my first book to read it properly. And that took me on a journey of studying psychology, psychotherapy, health, fitness, nutrition, everything about the human experience that I could get my hands on to understand why I had behaved this way and why it caused so much problems. And of course, when you're doing this research and study, Karen, you're having these profound realizations about yourself and, of course, about others, because what's happening to you is a human experience and it happens to others in the world. So for me, the seeker experience, the researching and studying allowed me to reconcile everything that happened to my life out there and everything that was going on within me from a psycho-spiritual standpoint. And from that, I could make sense of reality. I could do some healing. And most important is I could forgive myself for everything that I had done. And of course, once you've forgiven yourself, you find it easier to forgive others for their failings and their shortcomings. And that's when you start to heal with other people what they may or may have not done to you in your life. All right. So
Yeah. I mean, forgiveness is massive, and I think forgiveness is one of the best things we could do for ourselves because when you forgive somebody, that somebody has no idea that you're in pain because of them. So you're wandering around with this massive cloud, being angry about something that's happened to you in a relationship or whatever it is, really angry, bitter, twisted, and then it's just a decision. I forgive you. Oh my God.
yeah,
And this cloud is lifted, and wow, it's just,
doesn't
you see the light, you see something so differently. I think that's really important. And the other thing I was going to say when you were talking, because you're saying there's a lot of wisdom in your words here. And I think it's also about what you are, not just who you are. Whenever I'm doing a presentation, I normally start off with saying, what are you or why are you here? Because when you do get involved in the matrix, in the status of what we've been brought into with all the paperwork and certificates and stuff like that, and then you get the bills and then you get the complaints and all this stuff that happens to you, especially in the last few years with the lockdowns and the lack of freedom. And it can get really depressing. And I know of many people that have really suffered and are still suffering. And I know people that are no longer here by their choice, which is so sad. And, it gets all of us at some level. Something in life will get most of us down. But then you look at yourself and think, why am I here? What am I? And that is when you can really do that research and realize it's not just about being a physical person. There's more to life than just, traveling around the world, or as nice as it is, or watching telly, or having a nice meal, or hanging out with mates. There's something so much deeper. And for me, when I felt really down and depressed and low, I sort of say, take myself out of it. And I think, well, hang on, this is just a journey. I'm going from cradle to grave here. This is my experience of being in this physical body as Karen. I'll do the best I can and I'll draw it as much as I can because at the end, there's something which is much bigger. And that's what reminds me to get through the negative stuff, which we all get, the black and white, the yin, the yang, the shadow, because there's more
yes.
to life than just being this human being. This is this flesh is a skin suit. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. Please continue.
That
I
brings
love
me
it.
that brings me nicely onto these next 2 points on this slide, which is the
Yeah.
ego resurgence. Because what I found in my personal experience, and I think this is very much again connected to the Mao principle, which is the needing to have some type of purpose and mission in life, because that is just genetically wired into us. That's not something you can get away or put to one side as a man. It is always there and always present. Is that you're you're always trying to find some type of purpose. And if you've been through a situation in your life where you've been lost as this false personality, then you've come out and you're now trying to discover who you really are, and you're trying to express your true self, and you're doing all this research and studying, etc. There are moments, there are stages where the ego does reassert itself and try and latch onto another purpose and another identity as a sense of, this is who I am and this is my sense of worth and all the rest of it. And I found that to be the case when I was trying all these different things in life to see what I liked and what I didn't like. So when I was discovering that, hold tight, hang on, I can now recognize the ego. I can now see it getting attached to this thing over here. And I know that that leads to suffering, because once I'm attached to it, I go all in and my whole life is dependent on that thing. Yeah. So that's when I started to lean more towards spirituality and started to get more involved with meditation, spiritual practices, connecting with the divine, learning to disidentify with the mind, to observe and watch the mind, and be non-reactive to my thoughts. And that for me was always an automatic disconnect from the mind. Whenever I noticed the mind resurging, trying to latch on, spirituality always brought me back to center and always brought me back to peace.
Perfect. Yeah, nothing
Good.
to add.
Let's move on to the next slide. So this is another psycho spiritual status that I experienced, and that was being the observer. So again, this gets back to spirituality. I really began to study the mechanics of my mind. I really started to, from a point of being spiritual awareness, look at my thoughts. I could recognize the patterns of thought, and I could start to see the correlation between my thoughts and my actions. And I also started to see when my mind was coming to these conclusions or these assumptions that had absolutely no basis in reality. Yeah. So it would think of something and say, well, this is the way it is. But then I would go, well, how do you know it's that way? Because you've never seen it, proven it, or experienced it. You're just making that judgment up in your mind. And that's very important, because a lot of people in this world who are completely identified with the mind and the ego, that it's based on pride and drive and push and my way is the highway, will often make assumptions and conclusions without any verifiable proof or evidence. And that's their reality, which again becomes a false representation of actual reality. And of course, Karen, as I was studying my own mind and seeing my own patterns of thought, my own correlations going on, my own representations, you're now learning about the mechanics of how other people think, about the other patterns of thought and thoughts that others have. And obviously, from that standpoint, I learned not to trust or rely on others, because I knew that I couldn't trust or rely on my own mind to tell the truth, when it had spent most of its life living in some false conceptualized reality. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're in a guru. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, of course, studying what others say and do, and then I really started to pay attention to the wider world. I really started to observe and question the way the world was structured and the systems and everything that was established, from, banking, religion, governments, politics, absolutely everything that come across my attention as something that I deemed important. I would really look into it and question it, because I was beginning to think to myself, right, if this whole world is operating from the point of the egoic mind and where everyone's operating on this false personality, then a lot of these things, the way the world is structured and systems, must also be false or wrong. Yeah, because they're coming from egoic minds that are operating with a false representation of reality. And of course, from that point, all the big events, some that we speak about quite often, is the pandemic, of course, the 9/11 being a massive one. And of course, all these recessions that keep going on every sort of 7, 8, 9 years. I'm not looking at it thinking, why? Why do we keep going through these same mistakes over and over again? Surely we must be clever enough to now fix this issue and moved on from it.
Yeah.
But of course, we're not doing that, because the world has been designed this way. to revolve in cycles of boom and bust and these massive crisis events which are traumatizing a whole society of people. And it really was a frightening time for me, because I was having these profound realizations that the world was nothing like what I thought it was or what I was taught to believe it was. And I came to the conclusion that the entire world was crazy, a very crazy and dangerous place, full of traumatized, lost, and fake personalities, these psychopaths. And you might disagree with me, Karen, but I consider everybody that is totally involved in the mechanics of the mind and the ego as a psychopath, because they've chosen the path of the psycho. The psycho is the mind, and the mind is a pathology. So I consider everyone that's really stuck in the ego, really stuck in the mind, to be a psychopath.
I
And
don't
I,
think I would. Yeah, I don't think I would disagree with you. Sorry for interrupting there,
yeah,
but yeah, I
no,
don't think I would. And especially with what's going on at the moment, with all these files, these Epstein files coming out and stuff, and the truth that many of us have been aware of for some time, which has been so shocking. And we've tried to tell people, but they have, they thought we're bonkers. Um, all of them would have that label, narcissistic psychopaths, I think. And you see them in business, you see them in very powerful jobs, which is, like you say, can be very scary because they run the world. And
yes.
or that world, they run the matrix, because there are two worlds we're talking about here. You can be in that zone, you can be in the matrix, and be the straw man, let's put it, I can't think of another word to say, but not a sovereign person, and just go along with it. But there would be something, there's a little light in all of us that shines, and sometimes if you allow it to shine brighter, then you can start looking at yourself and at these scenarios which you're describing, whether it is a pandemic, but we can also talk about all the wars. We're on this hamster wheel, it keeps going. Why should there be so many wars all the time? They're made, especially when there's a crisis, but they're made to wipe out a financial dilemma that's taken place. But also, when you go deeper, if you want to go down another rabbit hole, it's the death of so many people, because we're talking about energy here, and people feed off that. I mean, that's a little bit deep, so we can leave that for another day. But what you're saying again is totally true. I get it. I get it. Not everybody will get it, and they might have been woken up by something that's happened recently. I know a lot of people say, well, the 9/11, that made me start looking and questioning and everything. And then you go down more and more rabbit holes. And then you can look at Tartaria, which was that period in time, which is quite new to me, actually. Only in the last few years I knew about Tartaria, which was a period of time that has been wiped off the history books totally. And that's when, certain people had access to free energy and sound healing, and that we were so advanced, they wiped it off because they weren't making money from it. So that's a big rabbit hole to go down. Lots of
and
information.
And one thing I wanted to highlight as well is you have to be very careful when you're in a position of observing the world, because if you stare at the abyss long enough, the abyss will stare back at you, right? So you can almost, by observing the world and getting involved and looking at everything that's going on, you can start to put yourself in a very hyper vigilant, paranoid, and fearful state, which is not going to help you whatsoever, because you're just feeding your energy back into the loosh of it all. So that's an important point I wanted to mention. So I'm going to bring us on to the next slide, which is a stage of my life that I went through, a psycho-spiritual status that I've named the Redeemer. So when I got to a point of doing the inner work, resolving everything within myself, forgiving myself, going through all the work of taking care of my health, doing the psychotherapy, cleaning house, righting all my wrongs, I started to wanting to go out into the world and make amends with other people. So, of course, the first thing I wanted to do is go make amends with all the people that I perhaps caused harm in my relationships. I wanted to make amends with my family and various other people. And I found that when I went out to try and do some good, whether it was to my family or whether it was to help people in society, because I have joined various different charity organizations through my journey to try and do some good, to put something back into the world, especially after I'd done everything that was bad, that a lot of what I was doing was being accepted by few and rejected by most. I got to a point where I realized that a lot of people just didn't want to know. They didn't want to walk the good path. They didn't want to do the good work. They didn't want to know about how things are wrong in society and how it should be this way instead. And I almost got to a point where I felt very disillusioned and disappointed that others did not see the world the way I saw it, or they didn't want to be part of something that was moving towards something positive, uplifting, elevating, and good. And I also noticed that as I was trying to be good and do these good things in the world, there was still a lot of bad things happening to myself and the world around me. So again, that was very disappointing. I became very disillusioned, and I was just beginning to notice a lot of problems out there that could be easily solved, but nobody seemed to care. Nobody seemed to want to solve the problems. They just wanted to stay, in their area, mind focus of doing what they're doing, putting on a TV, watching the news, and whatever else life they were stuck in. And they just didn't want to go outside of that sphere of life that they created for themselves. And that, Karen, was when I was beginning to feel kind of estranged from the world, feeling very isolated and disconnected from the world and from the people around me. And I began to have this very strong distaste for reality, because I knew in my heart of hearts, in my imagination, in my visions, and everything that I would read about and discovered and come to know, that the reality could be far better than what it currently is at the moment. So as I was being disillusioned, disappointed, and feeling estranged, that's when I really started to find solitude within. And that's when I really started to explore the playground of my mind, because the world that I could create and see in my mind and experience inside my mind, which I believe was a spiritual experience, was just far superior and far greater than the reality that I was seeing outside there. So that took me right within myself, and that gave me a very strong sense of connection with source. And I started to receive these very, very powerful visions and inspirations. That's when I started to imagine forming this society, this community, which I formed obviously later on in my life. And then I was being prompted and guided by my intuitions and developing prescience, which is a strong sense of knowingness, knowing things before they were going to happen. So, for example, when that pandemic came along, I already knew, I already sensed within myself that there was something very wrong about that. Everyone around me was panicking, going, watching all the news and listening to all the leaders come out of the programs. And I was like, nah, something's not right about this. This is very, very wrong. There's something. And I held back from it. And I was kind of very alone in my thinking, but I kind of knew that this was not going in a good place. And from my personal experience, that became true as I learned more about that particular situation. So please.
Yeah, no, fabulous. Absolutely. I think, not enough of us knew that there was something untoward going on when this scamdemic came about. For me, I could it was weird, but I knew something was coming before, like you're saying. I sensed it in the atmosphere. Didn't know what it was, but I remember I can visualize myself coming down the stairs in where I used to live, and I was like, something burning in the kitchen. And there was a friend of mine. I'd been on a plant medicine retreat actually in Spain, and there was a guy that I met there who went off to live in Ireland because he was talking about all this stuff that was going on in China. He was obsessed with it, and I was saying, "What are you talking about?" And then he showed me these videos of these people falling down, and all these actors and trying to put the fear on. And I thought, "Oh, this is interesting." And then when it really took off, I just thought, "This is God. This is what they're doing to us." And to me, it was blatantly obvious, but for most, it wasn't, and it still isn't. Still some people are in that trajectory, and that's their journey. Because I think a lot of us have also found that we've tried to help, talk about charitable, we've tried to save them, we've tried to give them the information, and they don't want to know. And I think that's fine. It's easier to live this life in the matrix, not knowing, and just get on with, your football and your bread and circuses and whatever else that entertains you, and ignore the spiritual side, because being sovereign takes work. As we've always said, it takes work to be a sovereign person. You have to do the work, the inner work, and understand the nature, but it will open doors to something so much better than the life that we live here. That's what I truly believe. Again, whoever's watching this, you have to be decide for yourself. don't look at me for the answers, and don't look at Russell for the answers either, because you have to make your own decisions. We're just giving you the information. But also going back to the charitable thing, like you, I wanted to do charitable things, and I actually set up a charity. I set up my own charity called Friends of Chima and Kizzy. My nickname's Kizzy. And that was building schools in Sierra Leone. And it was all registered. So I did it all properly, because people said, well, if you're registered and get a charity number with the charity commission, you can apply for grants and da 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 da. I did, but I didn't get any grants. It was all like self-funded. And then one day, I've closed the charity down now because of what happened. The charity commission contacted me. I'd do what I thought was proper. I'd give him my accounts every year. And then one time I gave him my accounts, and they said, oh, you've earned too much money, or you've donated too much money for you to do your own accounts. It needed to go through a charitable accountant. And I didn't know that. So we're going to have, an interview. To me, it was a bloody inquisition. And they said you needed to set aside 3 or 4 hours on a certain day. And then he started quizzing me about all this stuff. And I just thought, I haven't set up a charity for this. I've set up a charity to help people in Sierra Leone and build schools and everything. And he was saying, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need. And I said, for example, if I'm hopping on the back of a motorbike to get from A to B, and I said, are you saying that I have to tell somebody where I'm going, what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, why I'm doing it, and then get a receipt at the end from somebody who probably can't even write English? And he said, well, yes. And I just thought, sod it, I'm going to close the charity down and do things alternatively. Because again, I'm using this example because that is back in the matrix. That is back in the system. It's not being a sovereign being. I could give the money independently. I didn't need to be in the system to set up a charity and do what my intention was. So, yeah, and we know a lot about charities now. Again, I'm just going to say this as an example. When I was over in Sierra Leone, we built this little mud school, basic schools, nothing major here. I was just putting the money and helping. And every person in the village had to be involved in creating this school. But when we opened it, the guy, one of the guys, there were like 14 villages that came together. And we had a big open day. I don't think I've said this on this channel before with you. Have I said this to you before? Don't think I have.
Sure, no, I don't think you
No.
have. No, this is new.
No, so there were, I think it was a big day. It was a big day, and we just had bananas and water and a shelter, and everybody else was out in the sun, in the baking sun, with no bananas and no water. But hundreds of people, because they'd waited for the school for so long, as it came to my attention, because all these people from the villages, all the village elders would come and say, thank you very much. And I'd say, you're very welcome. But it had to be translated in their local language. And there was one guy that could speak English, and he said, thank you very much. And we're very grateful. Allah has brought you to us, because Allah, I don't know about that, but Allah has brought you to us to build the school, and hopefully you'll build a mosque. I don't think so. He said, but we have waited, and this blew my mind, we have waited for 40 years for this to happen, because an NGO, a non-government organization, came 40 years ago promising a school, and it never happened. And it's taken Allah to bring Karen to the school, and I thought, what a load of tosh that is. Because you see these charities, these NGOs go there in their, they stay in their 5-star hotels and their 4-wheel drives, and they go off and visit and take pictures, and then they go and drink and have a nice time, and nothing's done. And again, it was like a massive wake-up call for me about how the world is run. Just another aspect of it. Sorry, I digressed a little bit, but it's you mentioned
thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's so powerful. And do you know what? You've just highlighted the fact that the entire matrix, if you're trying to do something in the matrix, if you registered some type of venture in the matrix, you've just placed yourself into an area of control and extortion.
Yeah,
they're trying to control
absolutely,
what you're doing,
totally.
and extract value from what you're doing, and that prevents you from actually doing the thing that you want to do or get to the place you want to get.
Yeah,
it's such a sad reality.
It is. It is sad. Interfering. Yeah. Ugh. Anyway.
Okay, let's move on. We get to the final, well, not the final slide, but the final one where we speak about psycho-spiritual status. So this would be the sovereign. So I got to the point, obviously, where I was totally disillusioned and disenfranchised with reality. I was feeling isolated, and I started to question, surely I can't be the only one that sees reality this way. Surely I can't be the only one that feels the same, looks at reality this way. There must be others just like me. And of course, I don't know about you, but I've always experienced in my life when I start asking questions, seek and you shall find, right? The reality typically comes into my life when I'm looking for a specific answer. And again, that's a spiritual aspect of life, connecting with source. And I started to obviously watch social media, and particular videos were being presented to me about a private society that's based in America. And I was asking that question. And that's when I started to connect with these other people that were formed a private society in America that were a society for sovereignty, a society for peace. And I thought that's fantastic because, I want to gain independence and freedom in my life, and I want to be part of a society that's for peace. Yeah, something that's completely contrasted from the current reality and the kind of reality that I do want to be a part of. So I joined this private society. It's called Pantera. They've been going for many years, based in America. And of course, once I joined their private society, I really started to learn more about the structures and the systems of the world, and all about the deceptions and the corruptions of these nation states by the way they've been formed, and realizing that citizenship, to be a citizen of a nation state and part of that type of society, was a form of modern day slavery. It's wage slavery, debt slavery, and tax slavery. Because when you start to look at the figures of what you're earning and what you're handing over, to whether it be the banks in interest on your mortgages over 30 years, or whether it be tax across your entire lifetime, if you haven't structured your life and estate to protect yourself from all these extortions that are going on, you can pay anywhere between 40 to 80% over to the government and the banks across your entire lifetime. It is frightening. So as I'm learning about the world structures and systems with this private society, I'm also learning about the legal system and the laws, and I'm learning about all the knowledge and procedures to actually unwind from the system, to actually cancel, to rescind citizenship and establish sovereignty. And that requires a correction of status. Okay, so if you want to become sovereign, there's obviously the spiritual side of things, the psycho-spiritual side of things, where you go for a personal journey of reconciliation, of healing, of elevating and evolving your state of consciousness and awareness, of knowledge, skill sets, and all the rest of it. And then there's the other side of status correction, of actually going through lawful procedures to achieve sovereignty in relation to the world around you. Yeah, so you've got the internal sovereignty and you've got the external aspect of sovereignty. What are your views on that?
I don't think I can add anything. I think you've again, you articulate things very well, and no, I would agree with you. Basically,
Good.
nothing to add. Yeah.
So let's move on to sovereignty as a psycho-spiritual status. So this is my perspective on what and how I see sovereignty as a psycho-spiritual status. I see sovereignty as a status of awareness and knowledge that you have the absolute power and inherent right to self-determine, self-direct, and self-govern the matters of your own life and estate in accordance with your own free will and personal conscience, doing so with freedom and independence from any other authority in this world. And of course, to get to that status, you've had to transition from all the other psycho spiritual status and elements and stages in your life to have got to that place where you feel the absolute power and inherent right within to self-determine your life. What is your perspective on sovereignty, Cameron?
The same. To me, when somebody talks about being a sovereign person, I think, or sovereign, it's connected with spirituality. It goes hand in hand. I think you cannot be sovereign unless you understand again what you are or who you are or what is a consciousness. And I know people that say I've been to so many meetings and organized events and whatever, and people have come along and they've said, can I just write a check? Can I pay the money? And can you do it for me? And I thought, well, you haven't got a clue. because you cannot be sovereign truly unless you really understand kind of what you are, and you are much more than this physical person. And I think that's where we're going as well. You know, a lot of these people that have been running courses and stuff, they're telling you about the black and white, you know, the essence of being in the matrix and just fill in that form and fill out that form. But they're sort of getting their hands burnt because it goes much deeper than that. So
Yeah.
sovereignty is connected. Sovereignty to me is kind of being in the matrix, but then the spiritual side is it's all like that. It's all combined.
Yes, because sovereignty, like you said, it's a psycho-spiritual status. It's a status of as within, so without.
Yeah,
So who I am inside is how I'm going to express and form and establish my life and a state. Whereas if you're not truly sovereign and you don't truly hold an absolute power inside to self-determine and self-direct your own life, then you are going to be involved in the matrix with third party inventions that are going to want you to place the matters of your life into their form, into their procedures. And of course, they're going to extract value from you. And of course, they're going to control your activity in any aspect of your life. And that's when you lose your sovereignty. That's when
yeah,
you lose your natural freedoms and rights. So it can't be something you pay someone, you know, here's X amount of pounds, can you make me sovereign? Can you execute that lawful procedure? You've got to go
yeah,
through the process where you actually have, you embody
yeah.
sovereignty, you embody the authority and power. So let's move on to the
Can I
next
also
slide.
just say something else on that? So I have a friend of mine who, because we've got some people are very spiritual, but they don't get it. They're not grounded, and that's why I think the sovereignty and the spirituality have to connect. Because as the people that are very spiritual, I said to somebody recently about trust, and I made a joke. I might have even called it on one of my podcasts. You will own nothing and be happy, because we know where that saying came from, the World Economic Forum, Mr. Schwartz. And I thought, what? You know, you'll own nothing, and we're all in fear. But going back to the trust, if you're putting everything in a trust, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy because, you know, it's a way out of protecting, or it's a way of protecting your assets. So I said this to a very spiritual person. Like, she claims to be very spiritual, but she had no idea. She said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, that's what Klaus Schwab said. You'll own nothing and be happy. Why do you want to do that?" And so when you've got these people that are very spiritual, they need to come back. They need to be aware. They don't have to just keep floating up there with the clouds and the angels and stuff like that. They need to be very grounded and rooted to understand the whole concept of sovereignty when it's linked to spirituality. Just being a spiritual person doesn't get you out of it, because you're here for a reason to, you know, to go through and understand exactly what you are. Just want to
Yeah.
throw that in.
Yeah, I want to add some colour to what you just said because I personally went down a spirituality pathway and I really got into the practices of meditation and disconnection from this, that, and the rest of it. And then what happened is I became impotent as a man because I wasn't actually expressing my full potential and my drive by putting out positive change and
Yes.
effect into this world, which is my duty and my honor as a real true man standing in my masculine principle. You know, that's what I'm here to do, wired to do. And therefore I found that spirituality became a form of escapism from the matrix. I'll just escape over here and ignore all that because that's all bad over there. And I'm a spiritual person and everybody else is not. But actually, not. If you're a spiritual person, you're saying you're a spiritual being having a human experience, then everybody else in this world is also a spiritual being. Even that
Yeah.
person down in the local pub who's 60 years old, who's been a drunk all his life, is a spiritual being having a human experience according to your perspective and logic on it. So, you know, you can't isolate yourself from
No.
reality. Participate, because that's what we're here for, right? So have a
Yeah.
good time, participate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my
And that,
personal,
yeah, and that's great. As we were saying at the beginning, you know, the men, you know, need to show up. The men need to show up, because don't escape through all this other stuff. We need the men now, and the spiritual aspect and the sovereign aspect. So thank you
and
for
to
being
show
here.
up with the mind connected to the heart so that there is good intention behind the purpose and the drive, and it's not just about money, accolade, title, wealth, this, that, all the
No.
egoic stuff. It has to come from the heart if we're going to live in a good world that actually truly benefits everybody.
Yeah.
And so getting back to the definition of sovereignty, it is a personal transformation. It is achieved with the study and integration and execution of lawful documents and procedures that elevates and evolves your psycho-spiritual status and power in relation to the world around you. And that's the external aspect of sovereignty, of actually achieving sovereign status in the world out there, the execution, integration, and study of lawful documents and procedures. And that brings us on to the actual status correction itself that you would perform in this world to establish your sovereignty in this world as an adjudicated fact of law. So these documents that you see on this left side of the screen here, Karen, these are actually copies of my documents where I've been through this process of issuing a documented procedure called a declaration of status. And this document is huge. There's actually multiple documents that go together over 100 pages that forms a declaration of status. And this declaration of status is what lawfully rescinds and cancels citizenship as you assert your natural inherent status to exist and operate in this world as a sovereign man or woman who has true freedom from all forms of bondage and liability to all nation states. So it's a very powerful document and procedure, the status correction. Are you familiar with the status correction?
I am familiar with it. Yeah, I don't think I've done it. I'd know
Okay.
if I've done it, and people have talked about it. And there's other words, isn't it, to come out of the system. There's other terminology used rather than status correction. But yes, I'm intrigued.
Yes, there is, and there are many different people in the sovereignty movement that are getting involved in sovereignty that are now wanting to change their relation to the world that they live in, that are doing some form of status correction, and they have their own documented procedures of doing it. So that's what we're going to talk about, because we're going to end it here, because we're going to talk about that in part two. In
Good.
part two, we're going to get into the actual document and the actual procedure of issuing a declaration of status to the nation state to correct your status and assert your sovereignty in this world. I thought that would be a good place for us to end it right here.
I think it's a very good place to end it. And what I was going to ask you is, people that are watching these videos that want to start doing the work, is there anything up and running already that they can sign up to your academy and get going?
Yeah, it's the academy is done as a mentorship program with me, and I can only take on a certain amount of people each time. So I do my mentorship teaching within groups of 25 people at a time, and I take on 3 new groups each year, and the next group begins in April. Okay, so it's April the 12th. That's when the next group begins a 2-year mentorship process with me. And
Two
what I
years.
do,
Wow, that's a long
yeah,
time, isn't it? But so
it
it's a real investment. Yeah.
absolutely, Karen, because this is the real stuff here. We're not. This is not something you can just get someone to do in 5 or 2 weeks. This is a full integration process where I'm taking someone that has absolutely no idea about sovereignty, no idea about citizenship, no idea about the world around them, and I'm giving them the foundational knowledge, and I'm taking them through all the lawful knowledge and procedures and skill sets. And after 2 years, they're going to have everything they need to hold themselves as a sovereign man or woman in this world, and a full backing from our organisation. So what I do, Karen, is I say, listen, if you're coming into this completely fresh, or you're coming into this knowing a little bit about sovereignty but not absolutely everything, I say, right, come and start with me, do 10 weeks, a free trial. That means you can come and join me on the mentorship program for 10 weeks. I will take you through the foundational knowledge of sovereignty and citizenship. And after that first 10 weeks, you can then decide whether or not you want to dive in and go the whole way with me. So the next one available is, again, it's on April 12th, and I've got another 2 groups that start in July and October. So there's opportunities for someone if they want to get involved and have a look around before
Yeah.
they
And,
dive
and
in.
and what is the commitment? Is it like one day or one evening, a week?
Yeah, so what happens is when you join, you get access to a private members area on our website. So you get your own account, and you get immediate access to all the courses and classes that are part of our Sovereignty Academy. And you can go on to those courses and classes and study all the presentation videos that teaches you everything. And then what happens is you show up with me once a week on live presentation calls for 2 hours where we go over specific subjects and we do answers and questions and everything else to clarify what we're learning, so that I know every week you're progressing through and understanding everything as you're moving along.
And
So
so,
yeah,
did you say how many? You said there's small groups. Did you say how many? You might have done, but
yes, I do 25 people per group.
25.
Yeah.
Lovely. And um, this one will throw you. So, what about people who want to come out of the matrix and they want to become sovereign, but they want to go on holiday? So they've got a passport, or they
Yeah.
haven't got a passport.
So let's say someone's got a passport, yeah, and they obviously they've come out of the matrix, they're achieving sovereignty, they're cancelling citizenship. What we're actually doing is, the reality is that we still need to be able to travel. We still need to own our property. We still need to use all the public services to facilitate our life. So what we're actually doing is we're achieving sovereign status, but we're also restructuring all the interest that we have in the matrix so they're all put into private trusts. So let's look at the passport, for example. At the moment, you're a citizen and you are holding a British passport. You don't own the British passport. It's not your British passport. It belongs to the Crown. They've issued it to you and they've made you a trustee and a holder of their passport, and you're entrusted to use that passport and conform with all the legal legislated laws that go with that passport. When you become sovereign, you create a private passport trust. And as a living man or woman, you then accept and claim the passport as a gift in law and equity. That then collapses the trust arrangement that you have with the passport agency, because you now have the absolute title of the passport. You can then act as a grantor and place that passport into the private passport trust. The private passport trust is set up with trust terms, which becomes a private law of yours, where you stipulate all the terms that you can use that passport trust, and you stipulate all the terms that the passport agency cannot use that passport trust. The passport then becomes private property of the trust. You will then position yourself as the living man or woman who is a beneficiary of that passport, and therefore you benefit from the use of the passport. You then appoint the highest official at the passport agency as the trustee to handle all matters regarding the passport, and therefore if anything happens to you, whether you are stopped, whether you are restricted, whether you are fined, whatever it is, and it is unlawful, it is not justifiable, and you haven't done anything wrong, you can just send that issue back to the trustee and tell them to settle it using the equity of your life and estate. That's how you would use a private passport as a sovereign. If you haven't got a passport, go and get a passport, because you can only access and gain public benefits as a citizen. You can't
Yeah.
access the system as a sovereign. You can't access the system as a living man or woman. You just can't. So you have to have the identity of a citizen to go and get a passport. So if you haven't got a passport, go get the passport. Once you've got the passport, if you've been through the transition of citizenship to sovereignty, you can then create a
Yeah.
private passport trust. The same applies with the driving license.
Yeah.
So rather than doing what they're doing in the sovereignty movement, which is, oh, I'm just going to change my license plates and not paying insurance, and I'm just going to drive down a road, and which is completely cowboy stuff. What you do is you go, listen, you've got to have in-car insurance. You've got to have all these bits and pieces. Otherwise, you are going to get pulled up by the police. They're going to impound your car and they're going to detain you. So rather than go through all that, because we want to live a peaceful life, we create a private carriage trust, and then we secure the driver's license, all the public insurance documents, all the DVLA registration documents as private property of the trust, appoint the DVLA and a couple of other agencies as the trustees, and we take the position as being the living beneficiary. So what happens is, when you become sovereign, you are no longer acting in the matrix as a citizen and trustee in public matters. You've now repositioned yourself as a living man or woman who operates in the private outside of the matrix, but you are the living beneficiary of any public services and benefits that you need to live your life. And of course, most people, Karen, they've got their life established in the matrix and the public. So they need to be able to secure those interests.
I thought I'll throw that one at the end, because I've been asked a lot, if what you're saying is we're using their tools, we're still, because we're still using their system, but we're doing it in a safe way. We're doing it privately as sovereign beings, so you can still travel. We're using their passport. Do they know when we're doing all this? Though, do they know when you're putting it in the trust? Is that something we're just doing separate to them, or are we, sending forms to them saying, right, we're putting the passport in a trust now?
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're coming forward and we're utilizing the law of equity, because what's happened is this: we've come to the knowledge and the awareness of the deception and fraudulent status of citizenship, how the Crown and state captured our lives, pull it into the Crown Commonwealth, and designated us as a citizen, which is a legal person entitled that they own and control. So what happens is when we go through a status correction, we're going, right, we know you've done this. We know it's a deception and a fraud because you never disclosed any of this information to us. And the law of equity, there's a maxim in law of equity is that a wrong will never be without a remedy. Okay. And
Mm,
that's a maxim of the law of equity, which means if you've been wrong, there is always a remedy
yeah,
to correct
balance.
that
Yeah,
situation. And the remedy is this. And the remedy is this: I'm coming forward now because I have realized I'm not a citizen, I'm not a legal person, title, or entity, I'm a living man or woman. So I'm now coming forward, and I obviously need to use the passport because I need to exercise my inherent rights to travel around this world. And the only way I can do that is with a passport that you guys have rigged in your passport system. Yeah. And you've done that obviously to control the borders, which is understandable. But I now need to use that passport. So I'm going to exercise the law of equity to claim the passport so I can now use it in a private capacity. And the law, and I'm doing this in accordance with the law of equity and with the law of equity behind me because it gives me the right to do that. Yeah. So rather than be a citizen who is a title holder of the passport, who's controlled by the Crown Agency, the Passport Agency, and everything else, you're changing the dynamics of the relationship. You're correcting your status. You're no longer being the fake
yeah,
citizen. You're now correcting your status, which is the true status is as a living man or woman, and not as a citizen. And of course, you must be able to still use all the public services and facilities because that's the only way you can facilitate your life.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, fabulous. I'm glad I asked that because I think it's a question that people would ask, and they have during the last few years with as people are becoming more sovereign and going on various courses because there are a lot of people doing these courses, aren't they? But not to the depth of what you've just described. And so, yeah, fabulous. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're
And I
welcome.
think, yeah, so we're gonna wind up now. Those of you watching this, I hope you found it interesting. There's more to come. We're going to keep doing these, bringing the information to you. So I do suggest you subscribe and put a comment in. We'll always, as I say, read the comments and answer. Like it or don't like it. Ideally, like it. But yeah, thank you very much. And we'll come to part two next week. Status correction.
It's been a pleasure, Karen. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.